Valerie, I have it up. Can you see it?
No, no, no. I have it on my screen on my computer. Remember, I'm in the secure area,
That's
so I'm
right.
just looking at. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm on the title page right now. So just let me know when you
Okay.
want me to move along.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay. My presentation is on COVID-19 effect on the supply chain, supermarket supply chain. My name is Valerie Nutter. This is for the fall term. Dr. Tomasi is my advisor. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the introduction slide. Excuse me, I'm so tired. It's like 5:30 in the morning. Table of contents. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a very interesting topic. Who would have thought that the pandemic would have disrupted the supermarket supply chain throughout the world in this day and age? It's 2020, not 1918. There have been many influenza pandemics throughout the world. COVID-19 is one of the largest pandemics since the Spanish flu of 1918. The Spanish flu lasts almost 2 years, and since the beginning of COVID-19, there has been valleys and peaks in the number of positive cases. Consequently, this pandemic may last longer than the Spanish flu, or perhaps longer, even longer if there's not a vaccine soon. Many people have never lived through this sort of pandemic, such a huge pandemic. Since the beginning of March 2020, many United States governors implemented a stay-at-home order, and people began to panic due to the unknown. This panic created hoarding edible and non-edible items. People began to stockpile toilet paper, hand sanitizer, cleaning supplies because they thought they would not be able to obtain those items, which created a shortage in those items. Several United States governors ordered non-essential businesses to close and essential businesses to operate. For example, hospitals, police departments, and supermarkets, to name a few. Schools, colleges, and restaurants closed and or had limited access, which created another problem in the supply chain. Supermarket and distributors were not prepared for what lied ahead with the COVID-19 pandemic and could not keep up with the demand due to the shock in the supply system. Ironically, nutrition helps keep you healthy and to fight off sickness to include COVID-19. But if you are unable to get fruits and vegetables and lean meat due to the supply chain being stressed, then it defeats the perfect purpose of trying to stay healthy. This research will examine the stress on the supply chain in the United States. This topic was inspired by the COVID-19 pandemic and the effect it had on the supermarket supply chain. The pandemic uncovered many challenges and assumptions the supply chain was not prepared for. It showed that the supply chain is very much reactive as opposed to proactive. With the spikes in demand, the supermarket supply chain should have been able to recover quickly if they had a plan in place. However, supply chain from the distribution centers to the supermarkets was unable to keep up with the demand. Distributors could not get supplies to the retailers fast enough. The panic started when the stay-at-home order commenced. People started stockpiling edible and non-edible items. Shelves became empty as fast as the supermarkets could stock them. Many people started working from home, virtual schools were launched, and essential workers continued to work. This was the recipe for change in the shopping habits. People began to cook at home more often. Next slide.
Valerie, what slide are you on right now?
I'm on for
Is it literature review and background?
problem statement.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. COVID-19 had a domino effect on the supermarket supply chain from the suppliers to the retailers. The supply chain was not ready for the pandemic, therefore it was disrupted. The supply chain was unable to bounce back quickly from the increase in demand, so they failed the consumers. The failure to support the demand added to the panic to the consumers, which created hoarding. The research will look at the challenges COVID-19 created for the supermarket supply chain and a way ahead post COVID-19. The question that will be addressed in this research will be how has the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted the supply chain from the distributors to the retailers. In order to do this, other parts of the supply chain will have to be looked at also. The retail supply chain consists of the manufacturers, wholesalers, retailers, and consumers. The distribution center was had issues with transportation, and they were not able to deliver quickly to the retailers due to the road closures, no rest stops, etc. Because of the hoarding, their orders increased. Retailers couldn't keep items on the shelf, therefore consumers thought there was a food shortage. So the consumers started stockpiling edible and non-edible items. There was not a food shortage. Slide 5, please.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Dawn Bark is a senior research fellow in agriculture policy. He talked about ensuring a stable food supply during the pandemic. He talked about the challenges in the food supply, but there is not a food shortage. The thought of a food shortage created hoarding, which created a disruption in the supply chain. Farmers could not get their products to the processors due to the farm help shortage. American agriculture interests were concerned with this development will make it more difficult to secure guest workers through the H-2A temporary agricultural worker program. Many farmers rely on legal guest workers, especially those coming from Mexico. He said the government should review regulatory obstacles that may hinder the food supply. In another article by Lisa Hell talks about how once the product leaves the farm, then it either goes to the processor or the consumer. For example, milk. It may be used to make cheese or go directly to the consumer. Since the closure of service places, a lot of food has been destroyed due to the lack of demand from schools and restaurants. The meat industry took a huge setback also, which created meat prices to increase. Pitt talks about the impact of one plant closing would have a significant effect on the meat packing supply. The largest pork packing plant accounted for 60% of pork processed. So and even one of those plants closed for a day or weeks, the consequence ripples across the industry. The challenge is to keep employees safe. Wholesalers depend on the manufacturers to supply them with what the retailers demand. They had issues with roadways closing, employees contracting COVID-19, hiring and training temporary employees, shutdowns due to sickness, rest stops for truck drivers, etc. The supermarkets will probably have to reduce the brick-and-mortar stores and begin to look at e-commerce. This will reduce the number of employees at physical stores. Self-checkouts will increase to keep employees safe. Supermarkets are also hiring more employees. Safeway, a national supply chain, announced it has 2,000 open positions to fill, while Amazon announced that it hired an additional 100,000 workers to handle increased deliveries. Next slide, please.
Okay. I'm on the data.
Okay. The data was taken from previous articles from websites that were written by various authors. Because this is a new phenomenon, there are a variety of viewpoints from different sources, which made this research very interesting. Instead of looking at the global supply chain, this research only looked at the supply chain in the United States. For distribution, the e-commerce has grown since the pandemic. Consumers started ordering from online, from distribution centers, and or picking up curbside or shipping to their homes. Logistics has evolved during the year. Retail demand plan and recognizing the hoarding, retailers should have doubled or tripled these orders in a timely manner. Demand planning is based off of historical information. However, it seems retailers were not tracking during the pandemic. Curbside delivery help to cut down on foot traffic in the stores, safer for the employees and safer for the consumers. Home deliveries grew, whether it was ready-made food or groceries. Next slide, please. The food supply chain is the ideal way the supply chain to operate. The basic textbook model of the supply chain is what Valerie writes about in the article, which states that there are 4 key elements in a normal supply chain. The manufacturers are the beginning of that supply chain that supports the wholesaler and the retailer, and the end result is the consumer. But Valerie does not talk about in the article is from the wholesaler to the schools and restaurants. To prepare for the next shock in the supply chain, the retailer supply chain will need to follow the grocery store chain shift, which is shown on, slide 8. To prepare for the next shock, the supply chain, retail, the need to follow the grocery store supply chain. This will enable manufacturers to cut costs in inventory and allow the distributors to hold the inventory to allow them to get the products to the supermarkets quicker. It is inventory management. Based off of demand, the distributors will be able to hold inventory for a period of time until it's moved to the supermarkets. This will reduce the cost of inventory to the processors. The distribution center will have to do demand planning based off the orders from the supermarket. Demand planning is based off historical information. But this new way will cut down on the time, cut down to get supplies to the supermarkets. Consumers will have supplies available. This will be the new post-COVID supermarket supply chain to survive the next pandemic. Next slide. Here's exactly how COVID-19 fears impact sales at local grocery stores and supermarkets nationwide. So if you can look at the slide on the lower left-hand side of the map of the United States, it shows 3 different key codes, and it shows exactly how COVID fears impact in the local grocery stores and supermarkets. And then the right-hand side, top right-hand side, is the hoarding cycle, which is basically hoarding is like the circle of life. One part has an effect on another part. So because of the pandemic, people started hoarding, which increased the prices on certain items, certain essential items, and made some of the food scarce, but it was scarce in the supermarket, but not in the supply chain. Next slide. The consumer spending tracker for measured channels shows how the brick and mortar spiked and then decreased in early spring. Online edibles and non-edibles continue to increase as the weeks continue. As the COVID cases grew, so did the ordering online. And now that the COVID cases are increasing now, again, that we will have another spike. Okay, the surge of hoarding. It peaked in the spring, which made the consumers think that the U.S. was running out of food. As you can see, it started growing in the fall, but now that COVID-19 numbers are spiking, the hoarding will begin again. And it's mainly online, the people are ordering, not so much in the stores. It's going down. Next slide, please. To prepare for the next shock, the supply chain. To prepare for the next shock, the supply chain, the retail supply chain, should model the grocery store supply chain shift noted in slide 7, which will enable the manufacturers to cut costs in inventory and allow the distributors to hold more inventory to allow them to get the products to the supermarket quicker. Manufacturers need to increase the production lines for items that have high demand to enable them to get to the distributor at a faster pace. The manufacturers must increase high-demand items and reduce low-demand items, redirect employees to the high-demand areas to sustain high-demand items. For example, when a retailer realizes there was a high demand in toilet paper and paper towels, they should have ordered based on the demand. The manufacturers should have shifted their employees to increase production for those items because of the rate of purchases from the retailers should have stocked items until the panic subsided. The panic of hoarding subsided. The distribution centers will add more. We need to add more cold storages to reduce the footprint. Support e-commerce. More people are ordering online to stay safe. Distribution centers need to subcontract with other transportation companies. This will cut costs of them owning the trucks and put the cost on subcontractors. This will also enable them to reach more areas quicker, for example, cities. Subcontracting enables the logistics to continue without increase their fleet during the pandemic. Barks talks about truck drivers being able to get from point A to point B without any issues or concerns. Many dense areas will exercise vertical farming. It will reduce the logistic footprint, which in turn will cut the cost for the consumer, and some people may opt to grow their own vegetables at their residence or buy from local farmers. For example, and there's a citation in the paper by Nick Carrero and Leslie Patton. New Jersey started Arrow Farm, currently operates America's largest vertical farming, producing 2 million pounds a year of fresh produce in a 70,000 square foot facility in Newark, New Jersey, which fresh produce reaches supermarkets in New York City within a day of harvest. Retailers must increase the self-checkout since the shopper behavior has changed for consumers, optimizing the demand planning to ensure that they can predict the consumer buying habit, learn from COVID-19, and plan to see the surge before it occurs again. Next slide, please. The world is changing, and the companies will have to reinvent themselves to continue to evolve. The vertical farming will become the new normal for many areas in the world, which is happening now in the supply chain. It will increase revenue, reduce the transportation footprint. Local fruits and vegetable farmers will increase, which enable consumers to buy fruits and vegetables locally. Some consumers will opt to grow fruits and vegetables themselves. Distribution centers will align themselves closer to retailers to decrease the transportation footprint, along with adding cold storage warehouses. The curbside home deliveries will increase, which will reduce the brick and mortars. However, the brick and mortars will not be distinct. Some people will continue to shop at the supermarkets, especially in rural areas where Wi-Fi is not readily available. E-commerce has continued and will continue to grow, especially for non-edible items. The ease of ordering online and having them delivered directly to your door is a win for consumers. People will continue to stockpile certain edible and non-edible items, canned goods, meats, toilet paper, cleaning supplies. Some changes may have an immediate impact, but some will take longer. Now that the disruption has happened, the supply chain, excuse me, they have a starting point to work out the choke points and create a way ahead. So when another pandemic occurs, the supply chain will be ready to support the consumers. Next slide, please. And these are my references. I would like to thank Towson and Dr. Stella D. Tomasi for working with me while being deployed overseas. And the references are as follows. And that concludes my brief.
Thanks, Valerie.
Do you have questions for Valerie, please?